Victoria and MJ says is that you didn't realize you had abandonment issues until later. And MJ, you said this like subconsciously, you didn't realize. And that's something that comes up with my clients too. You don't really, while it's happening and you're in the moment of being abandoned, you don't realize until later. And that, I think this is where all of us come in and the clients that we serve is that they're coming with this empty void or a need or this like thing that they just can't fill, and it's real and it stems from this feeling left behind or however you felt your abandonment issue. And for me, mine was when I was 19. I lost my father to suicide, and I was left with my mom and my brother and my sister and like the house, and I was 19. But as a 19-year-old, I was like, I can handle this. I had to sign the papers and go to the funeral home and like make sure my sister was eating because she didn't talk. Like I was doing so many roles. I wasn't even a daughter anymore. I for that while I was the father role. But 10 years later, well, 7 years later, I started to just cry, 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 cry. Like I couldn't stop anytime I was doing. And I realized it's because I had felt completely abandoned by my father. And yes, he had mental health issues, and I'm not blaming him for what he did. Everyone has their stories and their issues, and he couldn't handle. And if anyone here is listening, suicide is a very real thing. And if you need help, there's so many sources we can put in the notes below. But I felt abandoned. I felt completely abandoned by the person that was supposed to take care of me and my family. And I didn't realize, like you guys said, until years later. And then I was looking for boyfriends to fill that gap. And I was also just not good in male relationships because I was always waiting for them to leave, to just disappear, to just one day had it and like I can't handle, bye. So I was never successful in romantic relationships for a long time, for a very long time, because of this abandonment issue that I didn't know I had until doing all the work that we always talk about on this podcast.
Right. Yeah.
To answer your question, Victoria, another coping mechanism, I had a client that felt abandoned by both her parents, even though they were still very, very much alive. And what she did is she just filled her life with distractions. Like she never wanted to, she just disassociated from it. She never wanted to think about it, realize that she's on her own, even though she's in her young 20s. And she just filled her life with distractions to the point where one of the exercises we did was I made her list what she does in a day and versus what she needs to get done, like brush your teeth, go to work, whatever, right? And it shocked her. She was filling her time with anything but what she needed to do. And it was a coping mechanism because she didn't know how to deal with being so alone and left to fend for herself. And it's amazing. Humans are resilient. We do find ways to continue, and they're not always healthy, which is why we exist, right? We get to help you identify those things and get past them. But coping with feeling abandoned is hard, especially when we're not realizing that it happens until some years later. Right? It's a huge realization to say, oh, wait, this is stemming from this that happened in those 7 years, right? 1 to 7 years old, which is when a lot of things happen. So that was interesting for me, and how in that coping mechanism that I found with her. That I agree. You stay in relationships because you're afraid that it's, you'll never have another one, and it's not going to last. My experience was exactly the opposite. I would self-sabotage all my romantic relationships so that they wouldn't leave me. I always made it so that I left them first, because there was no way I wanted to be left by a man again. Like I was just like, no, I never wanted to go near the pain that I felt when my dad left, right? Like there's no way. So it's talk about coping mechanisms, right? Like there's so many different ways. And my approach was, I will fuck this up, excuse my French, so that I can walk away with my head up. I don't care what happens to you. But both of us were hurt anyway. I was still hurt too. I mean, my ego didn't let me feel that back then. But I'm really happy that I've learned to get past that. It took a long time. And like we're saying, awareness. We had to become aware that we had this self-abandonment wound first before we can even be successful in any kind of relationships. And this can go with any, and like I want to be clear, it's not just romantic relationships. This is forming any kind of healthy relationship, sister, friends, work, your coworkers, your boss, like that. There can be issues there. So it's not just romantic relationships that we're talking about here. It's just the examples are easier.
Right, right. And with that also comes, like you mentioned, that I'm going to leave first because I'm not going to be hurt, right? But that's also is that fear of rejection. So
what healthy ways, and I don't want to say coping, but what healthy ways do you help your clients through these abandonment issues, fears, rejection? Because I'll give my example first. One thing that I love to do with mine is I call it emotion expression, like getting your emotions out of your body. And there's many ways to do this. For me, it's usually through dance because that's just my magic. But writing, journaling, drawing, writing on a piece of paper, putting it in the garbage, burning it. I don't care. Like Victoria, you mentioned this earlier. Like there is a sense of grief that happens when we get abandoned because someone does leave, does die, does depart from whatever your current reality is. And when you don't really let yourself grieve, it just compounds the issue and it just gets worse. In fact, this month it's 26 years that my father died. And I cannot believe that. 26 years. And if I didn't go through and finally face that he chose to leave because he just had his reasons. I always thought it was me. And that sucks for a young person to think that your father doesn't want to be around because of you. And it's not until I went through what I was grieving and what I was thinking and what I was truly feeling and having people like you guys to talk about it, I didn't start healing. So grieving and allowing yourself to accept that loss is
yeah,
so important. And then expressing it however it feels good for you. Creative expression of emotion is so liberating.
yeah, absolutely. And I think for like,
Thank you for holding this space. It's so nice to be held and seen and witnessed. To the opposite point, I now know that I'm not, even though I would felt abandoned, I don't feel that way anymore. And so I would love to end it there. Like I've worked through so many things, and I don't feel abandoned anymore. Like I feel good and I feel whole, and I can cry because I didn't cry for 7 years. So look at,
right.
yeah.